we will go ahead and get started looking at some components that are new in our FCSUA community related to budget. We'll also address budget funding and how we want to look at that, but more importantly, we'll do just a little overview of some things I want to remind you, particularly if you're new to the team, your team has transitioned, you're doing some other things, questions you might have on your mind. I just want to kind of walk through a few reminders of what we're looking for and talk through those and answer questions related to the budget. Keep in mind that we have a funding cycle, a reporting cycle. And so with that funding cycle, I have talked to most of you that are up for review this year. Some of you are not ready to submit a continuing grant, more so a no-cost extension, because you're working on spending all of your funds down. And so there's about 6 of you that your grant is supposed to end this year, and it might not end this year. So we want to look at that. If your grant is ending this year, and based on your budget and our conversations back and forth, and you know that your funds will spend out pretty much at the end of June, you need to be in the community writing your renewal now. And that is because of the amount of feedback we have to do back and forth. Those who have new grants, it will not be as challenging as those who have a brand new one. Those who have a current grant, it would not be as challenging as those who will have a brand new one. And so you have some things that you can work on. And Claudia, is the current grant also clonable? Okay, so you have documents or you have information in there. And if you are not Tallahassee, if you're not Lee County, St. Pete, and McFadder, those 4 institutions are in the community. They submitted their new grant in the new process, so they are already in there. The rest of you, however, we've had to enter stuff. That's why we've gotten the logic model, and we're trying to get, and we've entered your budget. So you did everything as a Word document, even though you may have submitted it in the portal as a Word document. You didn't work through it like you're going to from now on. So we enter information and ask you to check it. But with the budget, if I talk with you about maybe you'll need a little bit more money to get you to the next funding cycle, I'd like to stay on this cycle. And so we kind of work with you to do modifications if you're in that case. When we're thinking about just the budget, there are adjustments and there are modifications that you might have in mind. And we're going to go over that and see what that looks like in the community. When we talk about adjustments, these are budget adjustments that only I approve. That's not anything that has to go through UCF's Office of Research. So the approval is with me. However, you need to submit a request, and we're going to see, instead of being emailed and with your justifications, because I always ask you, where's that change? Where does that money move? This isn't changing the funding amount. This is just doing some categorical changes, shifting money. Oftentimes at the end of the year, you have had funds, you move them to another fund. Sometimes you haven't filled positions, sometimes you've been thought about whatever you're doing. Either way, you're not changing your funding amount. Anytime you're not changing your funding amount, it is an adjustment, with the exception of a couple of situations where we needed to switch the PI and our records. It's an adjustment. So that will be done in the community from now on, not via email, and you'll have a format in which you can do it. So modifications, whenever we talk about modifications, that means you are requesting more funds. You have seen that the initial funds are not adequate for you to properly implement your program. Sometimes we've seen where, particularly with that indirect cost and your FNA, those numbers change. Sometimes if we see where in our initial Excel file where somehow the formulas didn't work, and we noticed that you've been shortchanged over our checking back with whomever is done your grant invoices, we might do that because that is again an increase in your funds that for some reason should have always been part of your agreement. But when we start looking at the modifications, you're asking one for a change of funds. You still have to make a request, and you still have to show where you're making the financial changes, where you need it. Then the other modification, you may remember when we changed our reporting date, like for the annual report, that's a modification we had to initiate, and we sent all of that to you. Instead of June 1st, we went to July, so we had to make that for our office to have that on record, because they send us reminders, as I'm sure your institution does, about, hey, this is ending, this grant is ending, or this deliverable is due. But also, when we agree on a no-cost extension, where you haven't spent your funds, and you want to continue to spend that money out, of course, I'm gonna require that you do. And I like some good examples we've had where one institution had $1 left, one institution had $100 left. Yay! I cannot emphasize to you how important that is for us to remain viable. That we show that we're using our funds as a collective, that we use our funds. And so until your funds are used, you will not get another one approved. So we kind of work through that to make sure that we're not being wasteful. And because of things that happen. So one thing for sure is the grant funds are there. You don't have to panic. Your staff doesn't have to panic to worry if you're going to have enough funds. Yes, you'll have enough funds. We just have to make sure we have documentation of that, because we all have a huge auditing trail. And our offices of research does not play with anything being known. So we want to make sure both sides are in a line with what we have to report. With that being said, when we're thinking about our grants, I've talked to some of you and made suggestions, and particularly when you're writing your proposals, you know, there's a lot of things that can go in your grants that we want to encourage you to make sure you put in there. Travel. When you're bringing your teams to the Institute, particularly in July, we cover the hotel, your grants cover everything else. You shouldn't be bashful, although there's a minimum of $1,500 a year. It just says a minimum. That doesn't mean you have to put that minimum. You know the realization of what you need for their per diem, their mileage, their per diem. Also, travel, professional development. Don't you need to go somewhere and learn some more things? And besides, most of you have been invited by us to present with us to other conferences. We want to do that, so we want you to remember to think, you know what? We have a lot to share. We have a story to tell. We not only want to tell it in Florida, but we want to tell it to the rest of the world. So in your budget, think about what's professional development for travel. Some put it under other. Think about supporting your team for travel. Think about supporting your team when they're going out trying to find placements. Local travel mileage needs to be covered. We want you to think about what is needed to adequately implement our program from our side. Other things. We were happy to see a lot of the programs have changed and added marketing consultants. Florida Golf Clubs had a whole consulting team just to do marketing. True enough, we all have marketing at our institutions. Sometimes they're not able to respond in the way that we would need them to, so we get an outside entity to help. That could be in your grant. You have to tell the story, particularly if enrollment is an issue. How are you going to tell the rest of the community what you need? So think about marketing, if it's needed. You may be in a situation where it's working great, and we want you to use the resources in your institution. But Our programs are above and beyond what our institutions currently offer. So we want to keep that in mind. Other things, personnel. These grants are designed to help you get the personnel you need to run your programs, however you design them. So I know that we think about personnel on grants being temporary. Now, you know, I have to say it over and over again. I am not the state budget office, but we have been more than assured that our funding is not going anywhere as part of state legislation. So, your grants will be renewed. When you need positions, you need to write those positions in to adequately support your programs. There shouldn't be one or two people running your programs. You need a team. Yes, you're going to use the institutional resources, the current resources. That's part of your program being approved. That your institution has agreed that you are part of the catalog of the institution, your board of trustees, your school board has approved it, your superintendent, your president. You're part of the catalog. And if you cannot advocate for that, let us help you and let us work with the legislators to help you advocate for that. Because you're part of the catalog. And we don't want to be mistreated. And so with that, get the adequate personnel you need. You need job coaches? Get your job coaches. You need people who can follow up with that 5-year stuff or whatever, add the enhancement. You see your numbers. You know what students are doing 1, 2 years out. And if they're not working 5 years out, in the best power that your program can do it as any other program in higher ed, what can you do to support the longevity of their employment in their dedicated or desired career path, even if it changes? So you need to think about that. What personnel do we need? Currently, when Drew and I look at the grant proposals, we have said and we have been told that it's up to you all. And I can't say it enough. We said, because we haven't seen any institution spend $500,000 a year yet, cap it at $500,000 a year for 3 years, see how that goes. And that's based on some criteria though. Number of students, residential component, multiple sites. So when we think about programs, we're saying to you, you're gonna write it up for $500,000, right? Because you're gonna need that. If you're at 3 or 4 locations, if you're at 2 locations, you need personnel in both locations. So when you're thinking about your grants, think about what's going to adequately help you implement your program and educate your institution of the breadth that you have to do that. I know 1.5 is not a lot. 1.5 million is not a lot over 3 years, but it can certainly help. Because your institution said, you know what? We will help too. You're not just here. We have other ways that we're going to support them to get additional funding for sustainability. They agreed on that in the program application. Look at your program application, help them remember. They also agreed on it in the grant. Look at your grant, help them remember. And help us if we need to help them remember. We don't mind. So, personnel, Drew, can you think of anything else? Travel, marketing. When you need things that are, and I'll come because I see your mouth moves and I'm thinking, when you need things that don't cover in the scholarship for students, equipment, materials that your scholarships do not cover, think about that over in the grant side. Put it over there so that you can adequately implement the program. So I wanted to do that and then answer questions you might have related to potential funding, things that you can include in your grant.
You know, the only thing was going back to Jacqueline and Stephanie yesterday and looking at job coaches. Maybe your institution has never had a job coach employed there before. Sometimes school districts have, but maybe not at a state college or a university. But having someone in that role to really help students with paid employment during the program. Maybe even work with students as as they're exiting and checking in with them. As some of you all have mentioned, that's important too. And the other thing, whenever we were talking about those things that factor, you asking for the maximum amount, is the number of credentials that you're offering to students. That's another thing, Some folks have very limited offerings, just maybe very few, but there are some that offer lots of different credentials. That takes additional staff or, maybe support to those instructors to implement all of that and to really offer that to a wide range, and especially when you have a large group of students.
FAU hires doc students to support them. Tuition of doc student scholarships can be used down in that other category. You can use other people to kind of really help you get some things. It's an incentive. You want to have people come on board, work maybe part-time. It depends on what you want to do. Think about who else you need to bring forward. So I just want to say that is you have an opportunity to think about your dream. And that's why you're doing this program. So think about it, how you can get it funded. I want to answer questions related to budget allowables, because we get them all the time. And remember, anything Emerald Coast asks, we want to be able to give them good support, because they're getting ready to write that grant.
Mine are pretty basic questions. I'm sure everyone knows these answers. So I'm accustomed to working with state and federal grants, and marketing is not one of those items that we can use. So what can you tell me the flexibility so that I'll know without having to ask you for each marketing item?
Marketing is one that can be, we are the, what's the word, I can't even hear.
We're
the approver, we're the ones that, grantee, we're the grantor.
Funded through the general
Yeah,
fund.
so we're funded through the general funds, and the funds come from UCF, although it is through the center. So our budget includes those funds to fund your grant. And so as the grantor, we make that decision. So it's not a state decision. It doesn't go past us. Okay.
My thought is, what else might fall under that, Wendy? I mean, I know that you know CTE really. What would be other things that just are usually not allowable that could possibly?
Food.
Oh, here, I'm sorry, I didn't bring you mine.
Food, clothing.
Here you go.
Food, clothing, billboards, printed items, any kind of marketing at all, and food.
I can't remember I can't remember which program, but there's a program that has like open house or has something like open house, and that includes like recruiting and food that they would include under there? Because I know you're right with grants, and sometimes food is that's not the case. But you have to have that in your grant. Any program? Yes. So, yeah.
So for marketing, we do an open house to recruit students, and then we also, our first year, did like a celebration, I guess you could call it, when the kids entered the program. And we used the university's marketing department. They called the news, had the news come to capture it. So the students thought they were coming for an interview, but it was really a reception. So they got that on camera, and then that obviously helped with getting, we got a lot of like media related inquiries because it was on the news. People were like, oh, I saw it. Can we, come and see the program? Oh, I saw it. So it was kind of like, we just made a nice ceremony, but we also used that to like help us market even further. But the university didn't give us a hard time with the marketing component, but we did have to use their caterer. That was like the only like hiccup. We couldn't bring outside stuff in, so that you might run into that depending on who.
So are we looking at it as recruitment? Because you can, the state will allow you to use.
The state will allow you to use money for recruitment, but not marketing. So how about like prizes? And I'm just thinking of the gamut, all of those things. Prizes, like, gifts.
And I know all of that isn't explicit in the grants. And then people find a way to, just like, you have materials for the event. You have materials for the event that you're going to do. Right? She said she didn't have an answer for that. So to answer you about shirts, you know, some programs use scholarships and or grant funds for uniforms and for, you know, people are clever with their words, identity, program identity purposes. You know, so that's other materials that you might think about that might be for the team and or students.
The program is interested in maybe buying gifts or presenting something to the internship placements that host our students. Is that something that any programs have ideas or how to word that?
Has anybody acknowledged employer participation? That's what you'll be doing, right? You'll be acknowledging employer participation and incentives to expand employment opportunities within your community. And so,
items, but we just don't recognize them on social media. Not with items, but we just recognize them on social media and in publications and through the university faculty connections. Like really just try to promote it word of mouth wise
and also it's still to me under marketing materials because you're expanding, you're spreading the word about your program, right? It's a way to look at it. Wendy, did you have another comment?
No.
Okay. And I'm looking because I see Joanne, she's thinking, because she is so creative and clever about how to acknowledge people in the community in multiple ways. And I don't know if you have something. Okay, did you want to share?
We are very grateful and thankful to our instructors who have our students in credit classes or non-credit classes. So every year we do a luncheon for them. And we ask them way ahead of time, save the date, that kind of thing. And they all come to the luncheon and it's worked out really well. They buy into the program. We're trying to get buy-in. So once they come to the luncheon and you know they've had a semester with our students, they help us promote them. They really do, as the college does too.
Thank you. Other categories? Okay.
Another way we recognize our inclusive faculty is our provost decided to give, at the end of the year they have awards like for different faculty positions, scholarship and that kind of thing. So we have now a inclusive educator award or something like that. Link champion, inclusive educator award. So it was the first year last year, it was super cool and we gave him one of our t-shirts and they made a big deal of it right at the big award ceremony.
That's institutional body.
Does anyone do bonuses?
Yes. I wanted Janice to get her steps in. Yeah, so we give our instructors, if one of their students passes an ICE, they get a $500 supplement. And that supplement comes, we have to go through the district, and they actually create the supplement. Another thing to keep in mind is, you know, depending on where you live, a lot of these big global corporations have money that they earmark for special projects. So we've been able to bring LL Bean, Chico's, Regions Bank, Wells Fargo, all in to be corporate sponsors, and then they can use their money to buy food and things like that. It's a little workaround.
Community buy-in. We have some others, you know, so people are thinking of ways because we do have restrictions and or with grants, sometimes in our institutions there's more flexibility if in our institutions we don't have a foundation account where we can buy food and do all that. So we have to think about, then what is allowable? And we get questions all the time, so I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. So we'll go on now and look at the community. If you have questions, other questions come up, then do. Now, if you're working in your logic model and you want to follow along as Claudia goes through the community, then you'll need to save, and then we can put you in there. We can return it back to you and do that. Otherwise, you can follow along up here. So that's your choice. And actually, so Claudia, I will have to look and see if they, so how do we do that? I can look on your computer and see if they're sending something back. And then, anybody will do that, so I'll at least know what to look for. Will anybody save and want to work through it at the time, or you're okay with following along? Do I need to you just stand up if you're gonna follow along, or what do I need? I need to know, what are you gonna do? Okay, everyone who is okay with just following along, please stand up. Please stand up. Thank you, so we'll do a follow along, okay? Okay.
When you go into the FPCTP grants tab in the community, this has program. So before, we only had the grant proposals tab. That was the only thing that we had before. Before you were doing, you are wrapping up reports right now and all that, and you were doing your annual and final performance report, all in Word documents, and you were asking Janice and Drew for those modifications and adjustments through emails. So that is all going away, as Janice is saying. So if you think about this, all these processes that you're seeing here is what you were doing, all related to grants. Now it's all centralized in one place. You just one login and it gets you to the platform. So what we wanted to show you is the most recent that we were finalizing in July when we met, and it's the modifications and adjustments. This is the same form for both type of changes. So if you're requesting a modification or adjustment, it is the same form. So what you have to do is just log in into the FCSUA community, go over FPCTP grants, and you go over where it says modifications and adjustments. In your cases, when we have this ready, as we said, we're bringing all the programs up to speed with logic models and with their budgets, or if you have modifications already in place for your grant, we're entering the latest one. So when you do your invoices, everything makes sense. The calculations are gonna be done for you now. You don't have to be worrying about what the Excel file is doing. The system is already set up to do that. So some of you might already be seeing that those things happening in there. But let's go in and let's just go through how would this look like when you're doing either a modification or an adjustment. So you will click in New, and it will actually set up your institution name and your program name for you. So when you go here to change type, here's where you select. Let's go first over the adjustment, which is the one that Janice was explaining about. You're not changing the total funding amount that you requested that it got approved when you wrote your grant. You're just moving funds around from one category to the next. And Janice, please correct me if I'm not saying this correctly. So the total stays the same. And the system is going to make sure that that happens. So let's say that you have a total of $100,000 as an example for your grant. And because you're doing an adjustment, you change a little bit from personnel and you put it on travel, an example. And it went over that amount. When you try saving, it's not gonna let you. It's gonna tell you you're going over the approved funding amount that you have when you wrote your grant. So it's just, you're gonna have a lot of checks in there for you to make less mistakes. When we had this in a spreadsheet before, it was more open, so we have to be checking, and I'm sure that you all remember that. So this is the kind of things that these forms now are going to help you out with. So let's say this is a very easy example. It's a 2-year project. You could, so you select adjustment, and what you're going to do is you're going to go over your 2-year the 2 years of your project. So you go to year 1, it looks exactly as the budget that you submitted. And for those who have already worked in the platform, like Janice was saying, McFadden, St. Pete, Lee County, Tallahassee, they already know how this form looks. We're trying to make it look very similar, so it's easier for you to go through this process. What this adjustment is doing, it is pulling your budget, your previous approved budget. It could be the one that you wrote when you, the one that you entered when you wrote your proposal. It could be a previous modification that you have. The latest version of your budget, it doesn't matter which one is, it is gonna be in here. So it's gonna pull, the system is gonna hold you accountable for that. So it's gonna bring it in, and what you're gonna see is you're gonna look at the information and you will make updates. The other thing, let me click here very quickly. So you saw that what I did there, I click on view history. So if you want to work on multiple windows, multiple tabs, multiple screens, because you're making drastic changes and you just want to have it in a different form so you can compare, so you can take advantage of that functionality. So you can have that original budget on the side for the personal category on year one, and then you can make your changes here. And that is going to happen for every single category. So it's easier for you to compare what you have before versus the adjustment that you're doing. So that is exactly for every section. As we said before, we asked you to describe and justify these changes. That's something that was already included in the spreadsheet. So now we're just bringing it here as an area for you to explain, to describe to us what those changes are. So you're gonna see that in every section for every year. If you have a 2-year grant, you're gonna see it everywhere up to the end of the grant. So it's very similar for the other categories, and so you're gonna see them all year by year. I'm gonna scroll down to the bottom, because I wanna show you, notice how you have the view history all the way through all the sections, so it's easier for you. So that lookup works for everything. It does all the calculations for you. So your total costs now everything is all the formulas that you had in that spreadsheet now are in the system, and it does all the calculations for you. It calculates the percentages and all that based on your F&A rate in there. And it also does all the totals for every category, so you can see what's your total for personnel, what's your total for travel, and at the end, the total of the budget. The submission process is very similar to what you're accustomed to already. So you have a save, you have a submit. So once you're done, when you're sure that this is ready, you send it to us. You get that email notification that tells you your modification adjustment has been submitted. It comes to us, it goes to Janice, it goes to Drews, and it goes through the same process. They go through it, the comment sections. When the data isn't there, it highlights it in blue. So when they send it to you as updates needed, you get that email. It tells you, your modification adjustment needs attention. Log in into the FCSUA Community. So that revision process that we used to for the report, for the application, is the same thing. You're gonna see that it's not gonna change. So you're already used to that. So we decided to keep just the same thing going for all of these new components that are now connected to the grant. Let me go back up, because as we did an adjustment, I want to show you a modification.
Any questions? And it makes more sense when you're doing it. We have some programs that are needing to make an adjustment. Okay, we got a question.
Sorry, no, is this starting now? This is how right now, we need to make an adjustment right now, this is how we do it.
So that's actually a good question. Yeah. So this is the latest component that we brought in. So quarterly reports and annual and final performance reports were the first one that we got ready, and we showed them to you in July. So modifications and adjustments is done. We are entering the information for all these things to work. And if you remember, we showed it to you when we were working all together in July, but this actually disappeared right after that, because all the 4 are connected. So if your logic model doesn't work correctly, and when you're doing your summary of activities, you're reporting on those activities, those outcomes, those outputs. If you don't have it in there, the system is not gonna work, it's not gonna do all the connections. Same thing with the modifications and adjustments. That's what we're finalizing now as well. So we are entering your latest version of the budget. If you don't have a modification or adjustment, and what you have is the original budget that you had in the proposal that you wrote, that's going to be in the system for you. Even that you did not wrote your grant, your active proposal at that moment in Salesforce and the FCSUA Community.
Okay, so maybe not quite yet.
Not quite yet, but we're gonna let you know, because as right now we are entering logic models, and that's why we're gonna have that session later for you to revise that. We're doing exactly the same with the budgets and the modifications. If you had an adjustment, if you had a modification, we're gonna bring them in. And we're pretty much sure that we're also gonna bring you up to speed with the invoices. At least that final one that you submitted is also gonna be there, so it makes the connection. So when you worked on that, you don't have to worry about entering all those previous one, or how much I haven't spent before. No, this is gonna have it, so when you work in your next quarter invoicing, your numbers are gonna be correct. We probably might be asking questions very soon about that as well, but that's what we're doing right now, so when we tell you it's go, it's all there for you.
And we are including someone from our grant office or whoever's managing this.
That's actually a good question.
And we're going to be including our grant office or whoever is managing the budget. If we're not doing it ourselves, we have to add one more person to Salesforce?
That's actually a good question. Some of you, I think that we should clarify that every institution has 3 licenses that they can use. Not all of you are using those 3 licenses, so think about that as we're bringing new components. I think this is the final big adjustment to the system. I think that now we have all the center processes that you do, they're in the same place. So now think about how are you using and distributing those 3 licenses, and think about this. Who needs that access to do the invoicing and the budget reports? So that is something to think about. Let me know if you don't have that person in your institutional profile, add that person, that name, that email, and communicate it to us, and I will assign the license. So that's how it should go.
Which is Claudia's walking back up. Update your contacts. Update your contacts. Because we just send whatever you should have updated in the community. So your institutional contacts, that's on you to update. We do have some ownerships that we need to change because they're still going to previous people who were the owner of a record. Claudia is working on that, particularly as we send them out with the logic model, we know that. But before you leave the Institute today, this week, update your contacts so you can get the right emails.
So the other change type is the modification, which could be, as Janice was explaining, you can have multiple options in there. So from your end, you're gonna see that your options are changing in funding amount. So if you need more funds, that's how you do it. You ask for that modification and you select changing funding amount. The way that the system works and it looks is very similar to the adjustment that I showed you. It's very, very simple. And they are exactly the same. You're gonna have the view history section to open up to have a reference from your previous version so you can easily copy. If you have 2 screens and working, which I really recommend that you do that side by side, is a very good way to do it. That's what we thought about this view history functionality. So it is the same structure, so you just go through it, making sure that everything comes in or your changes are in there. In this case, you're not gonna have the checkup that tells you that your total is over because that's what the modification, that change in funding amount it's about. So you're gonna be able to go and add all those changes. Again, you go ahead and submit it, and we will revise it. The revision process is exactly the same as adjustment. You know, you will get the emails with if updates are needed, and then when it's final approval granted, you will get the notification. What I wanted to show you is that the other modification type is the extension of the budget period. You can see that when I change that option in here, you get to add new starting dates and new end dates and the new project years. The time can change. As Janice was saying, there's some of you that have to go through that process. So this is how you do it. You will be doing this in here. So would you set up thinking about how much more time would you need? 6 more months. So you will adjust these days, or maybe you started, you're going to start for those that are new, because I think we have seen that they said, oh, we'll start July 1st, and they, oh no, we need 3 more months to start. So the start date, it's also in there as you as an option for you if that's what you need. So, but I wanted to show you that because this is the only thing that changes in here. You can, if you're gonna do an extension, it's the same thing. So you're adjusting your time. So how is that year 1 gonna look like if you're pushing your start date? So you will enter your new date. You will, you had an original budget submitted. So of course your history will also work. And it will, if you click on it, it will show you what is it that you have allocated. So you can use that also as a reference to complete that new budget that is looking different, a little bit different because the time has changed a little bit. But the structure, again, the structure of the user interface is exactly the same, and the revision and submission process is the same.